Berachot, 6th chapter, 5th Mishnah. משנתנו עוסקת בהלכות סעודה וברכותיה. Our Mishnah is going to deal with the laws of a meal and its blessing. עיקר קביעת סעודה הוא כרגיל על הפת. It says, what does a meal consist of? Usually, when we're talking about a meal, we're talking about eating bread. שמברכים עליה ברכת הסעודה, ברכת המוציא. In the beginning of the meal, we're going to make the blessing, המוציא לחם מן הארץ. Takes out bread from the land. ופותרים בברכה זו כל מה שאוכלים עם הפת. And once you make this blessing, that includes everything else, because everything else in the meal is secondary to the bread. וכן כל שאר מאכלים הבאים מחמת הסעודה. And all the meals that have to do with the meal, all the dishes that have to do with the meal, בתוך הסעודה, inside, as long as the person is eating. אף כשאוכלים אותם בלא פת, even though you already finished the bread, and you're eating them a while later after finishing the bread. כגון, for example, ירקות, vegetables, גבינה, ביצים, דגים, cheese, eggs, fish, בשר, all kind of meat, וכל מיני תבשיל וכדומה, and all kinds of cooked things. אבל הדברים הבאים שלא מחמת הסעודה, but things that come not as part of the meal, כגון פירות, for example, fruits, שאין רגילים ללפת בהם את הפת, that doesn't come part of the meal. Usually one doesn't eat an apple in the middle of the meal. ואף אינם משמשים כמנת מזון לשובע, and also nobody eats an apple to be satiated, it's just like a dessert. אלא באים הם לרוב לשם קינוח סעודה. They come in the end of the meal, as we call them today, a dessert. אינם נפטרים בברכת הפת. These things are not included in the blessing of the bread. אלא טעונים הם ברכה מיוחדת להם, but you need to make a blessing specifically for them. וכן השותה יין בתוך הסעודה. Similarly, if one drinks wine inside the meal, throughout the meal, אף שהיין בא מחמת הסעודה, even though the only reason you're eating the wine is that it goes well with the food that you're eating, אין ברכת הפת פוטרתו. The blessing for the bread doesn't include the wine. וצריך עליו הרי חלב בורא פרי הגפן. And one needs to make the blessing, בורא פרי הגפן, like we mentioned in the previous. לפי שהיין גורם ברכה לעצמו. Because the wine is so important, it needs a blessing by itself. Why? שבכמה מקומות הוא בא ומברכים עליו, because we can see that wine by himself is an important thing, and we make a blessing on him. אף על פי שלא היו צריכים לשתייתו. Even though one doesn't need to drink it. For example, when one doesn't want to drink wine and makes the blessing, for example, קידוש, כגון בקידוש, we make קידוש Friday night, or בברכת אירוסין, in a wedding, also, the wedding ceremony is on a cup of wine. This is according to Rashi. אבל מי ששתה יין לפני הסעודה, but somebody who drank wine before the meal, הוא בירך עליו, and he made a blessing on the wine, ורגיל הוא לשתות יין גם בתוך הסעודה. And then he wants to drink some more wine in the meal itself, אינו צריך לברך על היין שבתוך הסעודה. Doesn't need to bless again on the wine that he's drinking within the meal. לכפי שכבר נפטר בברכת היין שלפני הסעודה, because he already did his obligation with the blessing of the wine before the meal. וכן יין של קידוש בשבת, and also wine, like we do every Shabbat, we drink the wine, we make a blessing on the wine before the meal. ובחג, or in the holiday, פותר את היין שבתוך בסעודה. If you want to drink some more wine within the meal, after המוציא, we don't need to make another blessing, it is included with the Kiddush before the meal. משנתנו דנה ביין ששותים לאחר הסעודה. קודם ברכת המזון. Our Mishnah is going to deal with wine that we drink after the meal, like a dessert wine, let's call it. קודם ברכת המזון, before we make the blessing, the ברכת המזון, the end blessing. וכן בפרפרת, and also in פרפרת. What's פרפרת? לשון רבים פרפראות. It means all kinds of desserts. שאוכלים לאחר הסעודה, that one eats after the meal. שכן נוהגים היו בימיהם, at their times, it used to be a custom, שלאחר הסעודה לפני ברכת המזון, that after the meal, before you bench, before you make the ברכת המזון, היו מושכים ידיהם מן הפת. They would remove all bread from the table, וקובעים עצמם לשתות יין ולאכול פרפרות שונות. And they would make a second meal, to drink wine and to eat all kinds of desserts. וההלכה היא, and the law is, שהדברים הבאים לאחר הסעודה, that all the things that come in that second meal, היינו לאחר שמשכו ידיהם מן הפת, after they decided not to eat the main meal anymore, in other words, not to eat the bread and comes with all the accompaniments, צריכים ברכה לפניהם. So all these things, all the dessert in the second meal, need a blessing before them. שאין ברכת הפת פוטרותם, because they're not part of the meal, because they removed the meal, they removed the bread. In their mind they're eating a second meal. עומדם דין זה שלאחר הסעודה אינו נוהג אצלנו. As this rule of after the meal doesn't apply to us in our days, שאין אנו רגילים למשוך ידינו מן הפת עד אחר ברכת המזון, because we have the bread on the table until after ברכת המזון. The bread remains on the table in our time. ולכן נחשב אצלנו תמיד כמו בתוך הסעודה. So therefore by us it is considered to be part of the meal. מכל מקום, משנתנו דנה לפי הנוהג שבימיהם, nevertheless, our Mishnah is going to deal with the custom that was in their days, כמו שביארנו למעלה, like we explained above. So let's start. ברך על היין שלפני המזון, a person make the blessing on the wine before ברכת המזון, before eating, he makes like for a kiddush. שתה יין לפני הסעודה, a person drank wine before the meal, הוא בירך עליו, and he made the blessing on this wine. פטר מן הברכה את היין של אחר המזון. So, he did his obligation, he doesn't need to make the blessing again throughout the meal after he makes a mitzvah. שאינו צריך לברך על היין המוגש לאחר הסעודה. And we're talking about the wine that one drinks in that second meal, like we discussed. That is not a custom in our days. קודם ברכת המזון, before ברכת המזון, כמו שדיברנו למעלה. בגמרא אמרו, in the Gemara they explain, לא שנו, it says, what we're talking about, שהיין שלפני המזון פותר את היין של אחר המזון. When they said that the wine before, the blessing of the wine before is, includes in it the wine after ברכת המזון, אלא בשבתות ובימים טובים. It says that's only on Shabbat and holidays. הואיל ואדם קובע סעודתו על היין, because in Shabbat and holidays a person starts his meal with the kiddush, with the wine. ודעתו לישב אחר המזון ולשתות. And he has in his mind on Shabbos and on a holiday that he's going to continue to have this wine in that second meal. וכשבירך לפני המזון על דעת כן בירך. So on holiday or on Shabbos he had in mind when he made the kiddush that he's going to continue to drink that wine during that second meal. אבל בשאר ימות השנה, but if it was a regular Tuesday and he made he made בורא פרי הגפן, and then he made המוציא לחם מן הארץ, and then he plans to eat the second meal, he didn't have in his mind that he's going to drink wine in that second meal. בזמן שאינו רגיל לשתות יין לאחר המזון, this is a time that usually people don't have in mind to drink wine in that second meal, חוזר ומברך על היין של אחר המזון. In that instance, he comes and blesses again on the wine that after the food. שהרי זה כאדם שנמלך בדעתו. It is just like a person that decided in his mind, הוא מתחיל בשתייה מחדש. In other words, in his mind, he stopped the first meal, and now he's starting a second meal. So if he starts a second meal, he needs to make another blessing for the wine. As I said, as I mentioned before, this doesn't apply to our days at all, because we don't have that second meal. ברך על הפרפרת שלפני המזון, the person made a blessing on the food or the side dishes, let's call them, and all the side dishes that before he ate the bread, פטר את הפרפרת שלאחר המזון. Then he does need to make a blessing on the second meal's side dishes. For example, כל מאכל שרגילים ללפת בו את הפת, any food that the custom is to eat it together with bread, כגון, for example, ירקות, vegetables, דגים, בשר, fish, meat, מיני תבשיל וכדומה, all kinds of cooked foods, קרוי פרפרת. We call that פרפרת. In our language it's called side dishes. ויש שאוכלים פרפרת לפני המזון, and there are some who eat the פרפרת before we eat the meal. In our days this is called an aperitif, something to eat before the meal. Why do they do that? לשם גירוי התיאבון, so that your appetite is going to be awakened. וכן גם לאחר המזון, and you want to eat those specific side dishes also after the meal. לשם קינוח סעודה, just like a dessert. כאין ליפתן, for example, kind of some cooked food. ורבים מפרשים שפרפרת היא פת שמברכים עליה בורא מיני מזונות. Some say that פרפרת is like a cake in our days. It's a, whatever we term as a cake, that we make on it, we make a blessing on it, בורא מיני מזונות. כגון פירורים יבשים שנתבשלו בקרת המרק. In that time, they had like crumble that was cooked in the soup. or רקיקים דקים, or like biscuits in our days, וכדומה and similar. מכל מקום בא משנתנו ללמד, nevertheless, our Mishnah comes to teach us, שהאוכל פרפרת לפני הסעודה מברך עליה. That if somebody eats all these kind of cooked foods, whatever it is, מזינות, or it's other things, אינו צריך לברך שוב על הפרפרת שמוגשת לו לאחר הסעודה. In that second meal, he doesn't make the blessing again. קודם ברכת המזון, שכבר נפטר בברכה שבירך לפני הסעודה. Because he already did his it's already included in the blessing he did in the aperitif. So he doesn't need to say it again during that second meal. Berach על הפת ברכת המוצי, if a person made a blessing on bread, and he made a blessing of ברכת המוצי, פטר מן הברכה את הפרפרת שאוכלה בתוך הסעודה. Now everything that accompanies it inside the meal is included in that. אפילו שלא מחמת הסעודה, שהפרפרת תפילה לפת וברכת הפת פוטרותה. Everything is included in the המוצי blessing. But if he made the blessing על הפרפרת, אבל אם בירך תחילה על הפרפרת, but if he made the blessing first on the side dishes, like we said, כגון שהייתה זו פת שמברכים עליה, for example, he ate a cake, בורא מיני מזונות, and he make the blessing בורא מיני מזונות, כמו שביארנו למעלה, like we explained before, לא פטר את הפת. He did not do his obligation on the bread, and he needs to make another blessing on bread. מברכת המוציא. כשאין תפל, פוטל את העיקר. Even though it's a small piece of bread, and you're eating it just as an aperitif, as you can say, and you can say maybe will be included in the בורא מיני מזונות, it says it's not. ואפילו אם התכוון לפתור בברכת בורא מזונות של הפרפרת את הפת, even if you had in mind when you made a blessing on the cake that you're going to eat some bread afterwards, it still doesn't help. אינו פותר אותה. The bread is not included. וחייב הוא לברך עליה ברכת המוציא. He has to make a separate blessing on the bread, which is ברכת המוציא, even though in his mind the bread is an accompaniment to the cake. אבל אם בא לאכול מעשה קדרה כגון דייסה או לביבות, but if he wants to eat now some cooked food, לאחר שברך על הפרפרת, for example, another מזונות, another blessing of מזונות, אינו צריך לפרח שנפטר ברכת הפרפרת. He doesn't need to make another blessing for the second מזונות, because that is included in the blessing of the cake in the beginning, the פרפרת. בית שמאי אומרים, the house of Shammai say, אף למעשה קדרה. It says, not even מעשה קדרה. What does it בית שמאי mean? כשם שהמברך על הפרפרת, it says, just like you make a blessing on the side dish, or on the מזונות, according to which opinion, אינו פותר את הפת, that doesn't include the bread, כך אינו פותר מעשה קדרה. Also, he doesn't include in it any other side dishes, and you need to make the blessing for all the other side dishes. Another לפי הירושלמי, according to ירושלמי, מוסבים דברי בית שמאי על הפסקה הראשונה. The words of בית שמאי goes on the first part of our Mishnah. בירך על הפת patar et haparperet, where it says he makes the blessing on the bread, he doesn't need to make a blessing on the cake. Vesovrim beit Shammai, or he doesn't make to make a blessing on any other dish which is mezonot, let's say a pie. Vesovrim beit Shammai, and the house of Shammai hold, she'en birkat hapat potaret afilu ma'aseh kderai. They say that if a person made a blessing, and then he wants to eat a pie, he needs to make a blessing of borei minei mezonot on the pie. ומכל מכן, שאינה פותרת את הפרפרת. And how much more so, it doesn't include all the side dishes, nor does it include the pie, for example. אבל אם בירך על הפרפרת, but if he made a blessing on the side dishes, הכל מודים שלא פתר את הפת. Then everybody admits that he didn't do the obligation when it comes to eating bread, and he needs to make another blessing when it comes for bread eating. ולא מעשה קדרה, and also not on pies or things like this, for example, cooked food. Beram beTalmud Bavli, but according to the Babylonian Talmud, ba'aya hi shelo niftera. They have a problem with this understanding of Beit Shammai, and they don't have a solution. They don't know where to apply the words of Beit Shammai. Do you apply it to the beginning of the Mishnah or to the end of the Mishnah? And they come with inconclusion. They don't know. They don't know in Beit Shammai chukim al reisha, if the house of Shammai have a disagreement with the beginning of a Mishnah, or la sefa, or the house of Shammai have a disagreement on the end of the Mishnah. Mikol makom, nevertheless, be'anu et Mishnah lefi mishmauta, we explained it according to the simple explanation, shedivrei Beit Shammai musabim ala piska achrona, that the words of Beit Shammai actually goes on the last part of the Mishnah. שכך מפרש הרמב"ם, the Rambam also explains it that way בפירושו על המשנה, וגם רבינו ואדה ברטנורה. Also, רבינו ואדה ברטנורה explains it on the end of the Mishnah, just like we explained it.